Hi, my name is Griselda van Wyk and today we will be looking at the ear. Have you ever wondered what your ear looks like on the inside? Well, that's the questions we're going to answer today. Just to refresh your memory, we are busy with the human nervous system. We have done reasons for the nervous system. We have done the central nervous system. We've done the peripheral and autonomic nervous system. We've looked at nervous cells, the reflex arc, illnesses, the eye we've done, and today we will be looking at the ear. Now the ear can be broken into 4 parts, namely the structure, hearing, balance, and disorders. But before we can start with that, we have to look at some keywords. Now the first one is sound waves. Sound waves are disturbances caused by energy traveling through air, water, a solid as it moves away from the source of sound. Right, so if you bang on the drum, that will cause vibrations, and those vibrations will then carry through the air to your ear by the means of a sound wave. Right. Next one, amplification. Right, amplification is the increasing of sound. You're making it louder. Some of you have maybe a sound system at home, you're a DJ or something like that, and you know that you have to have an amplifier to make the sound very loud. So amplification is making it loud. Pressure, we can also talk about pressure. That's the force exerted on an object or the area on an object. Okay, so let's start with the structure of the ear. Now, you can see that I've divided this diagram into 3 colors. We've got the pink, that's for the outer ear, the yellow for the middle ear, and the blue for the inner ear. Right, so the pinna is now that flappy part here on the outside of your head. Your parents used to say, why don't you listen? This is not an ornament. Well, today you will learn that it has a function. Right, then we have our auditory canal. Now, a lot of people call this the ear canal. But if you look at this diagram, you'll see there's a canal, there's a canal, there's a canal, there's a canal. So you can't just say ear canal. You have to say auditory canal. Auditory comes from the sound, the word sound, and audio. So it means sound. So you have to call this the auditory canal. Then the next one of the outer ear is our tympanic membrane. Now we know the tympanic membrane as the eardrum, that little part there. But we don't call it the eardrum because it's a science, and science we call it the scientific name, which is the tympanic membrane. Right, now we go to the yellow part of the ear, the middle part of the ear, the middle ear. The middle ear has 3 little bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. You can see them there, right? And we'll go into more detail later. And it also got this tube here, right, this tube you can see here. Eustachian tube, which opens in the throat. Then we have the inner ear, the blue part. Now, if you look at this little thingy-majingy here, you'll see it looks like a little snail, right? There's the head, there's the little antennas, and here's the shell, right? Now, we don't call it a snail, we call it the inner ear, and these little canals here, the 3 of them, are called semicircular. Semicircular means half circles, right? Because it's half circles, right? So semicircular canals, right? And then this shell part is called the cochlea. And then, of course, we have a nerve. The nerve goes to the brain, and it's the auditory nerve. The auditory nerve for sound nerve. It's not the optical or the sciatic nerve. No, it's for sound, the auditory nerve. So this is the basis of the ear. There's got 3 parts, the outer part, the middle ear, and the inner ear. So let's start with the outer ear. Now, like I said, the pinna is your first part, and that's this part with the studs and the rings and everything on it, right? But it actually has a function. It's not just there for looking nice or whatever. And what it does, it actually traps the sound waves. If there's sound waves, it traps it, it catches it, and it directs it towards the auditory canal. So it actually has got a function. The auditory canal then transmits these sound waves to the tympanic membrane, right? And it also have cerumen glands. Now, cerumen glands is wax glands. It will excrete wax into your auditory canal. Now, just think, why do we need wax in our ears? There's a lot of dust particles and insects and pollen all around you, and it goes into your ear. Now, the wax will trap that dust and stuff, and it will come out of your ear, so it keeps your ear clean. Imagine if that wasn't the case. After 40 years of very dusty life on Earth, your ear would have been full of dust. You will have dust in your ears. You won't be able to hear, right? So you need this wax to keep your ear clean, but it also moisturizes the tympanic membrane and inside the ear as well. Right, then we have the tympanic membrane. Now that transfers the sound waves to the bones of the middle ear. And the tympanic membrane is like, if this is now the membrane, it can vibrate, right, like this. And it depends on the frequency of the sound, how hard it will vibrate or how fast it will vibrate. Right, let's go to the next one. Middle ear. Now the middle ear, you can see this is now the auditory canal here. This is the tympanic membrane. So the middle ear is this whole space here, and it's filled with air. It's very important. It's filled with air, not liquid. And there are three bones in here, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, right? There's also a eustachian tube that will open up into the throat. And that's, we're going to talk about in more detail about this now. So let's look at the ossicles. The ossicles are the smallest bones in the body. Have a look here. Look how small they are. This is fitting on a human's fingertip, right? Now, the names of these little bones comes from what they look like. If you look at the first one, it looks like a little hammer there, right? A little hammer. And the Latin name for hammer is malleus, malleus, right? The second one has got this little table thingy here on top, right? And that is called an anvil. In the old days, the blacksmiths used to melt iron, and they would strike the hammer on the iron there, right? And they would make new objects. And you can see what the anvil looks like, and look at that. It also looks like an anvil, right? And then the Latin name for anvil is incus, incus. And then the last one is a stirrup. And if you watch TV or you have a horse, you're lucky enough to have a horse, you will see that they have little footrests where you put in your foot. Now that part there is the stirrup, right? And can you see how much this one, this little bone there, looks like a stirrup? And the Latin name for stirrup is stapes, right? So we prefer you to always use the scientific names, right? So you use malleus, incus, stapes. And easy to remember is MIS, so it's M-I-S. So what is the function of the ossicles? The first function is it has to vibrate. It takes the vibrations from the tympanic membrane to the inner ear. Right, so the sound travels via vibrations to the inner ear. That's the first function of ossicles. The second function is amplification. Remember I said amplification is making it louder, right, louder. Now the first way it is done is by the area of the tympanic membrane. Can you have a look here? You'll see how big this tympanic membrane is, right? And there is the little oval window in the inner ear, or where the stapes is now. Look how small that is. So the energy from this membrane that's vibrating is now all concentrated on a small area there, and that amplifies the sound, right? So the sound is amplified, so you've got a little amplifier in your head. Right, the second way in which it amplifies sound is if you look at the ossicles, you will see that the first one, the malleus, is very big. The incus is also very big, but look at that stapes there, so very small. So it's arranged from big to small, and that also helps with amplification, right? And it can actually amplify sound more than 20 times, right? So it's really, you've got an amplifier in your head. Let's get to the eustachian tube now. Right, it connects the middle ear with the throat, right? And also excess fluid, if you've got excess fluid there and you get fluid from infections and stuff like that, you don't just get water in your ear. So if there's a build-up of fluid there, it can drain here. It can drain through the eustachian tube to your throat. Right. It also equalizes pressure on both sides of the tympanic membrane. Now let me explain it in this way. Right. If this is your tympanic membrane, it has to vibrate. If this is the auditory canal, right, there's air pressure on it from the outside. If this is your middle ear, there's air pressure from this side. So if the pressure from outside is more than the pressure from the inside, it will basically bend bend the tympanic membrane that side. So now it can't vibrate, and it's painful. It's very painful. So the pressure on both sides needs to be the same, equalizing, so that your membrane can vibrate as it should be vibrating. Right. Let me give you two scenarios where it can change. Right. I'm an avid scuba diver, and I like to brag, that's me, right? So the deeper you go into the ocean, what happens is the following. Now the water pressure becomes higher the deeper you go. So if this is your auditory canal, the pressure from the water becomes intense. It's now pressing on this tympanic membrane, right? And the pressure in your middle ear stays the same, right? So you start to get a lot of pain. And you can't hear because it can't vibrate. So they teach you to close your nose and blow on it, and what happens, you force air into your eustachian tubes into the middle ear. So then the air rushes in and the pressure is equalized on both sides. Okay, so that's scuba diving. But also when you go in an airplane and you go higher up, the pressure decreases. It decreases. So you've got your tympanic membrane, and now in the auditory canal, the pressure decreases, right? So it's not so much anymore. So what happens to your tympanic membrane? It's now being almost sucked like this because the pressure on the middle ear is still the same. It's pressing on it now, so you get pain. So what they usually tell you to do is to yawn. When you yawn like this, you open up your eustachian tube here, right? Air can flow out. The pressure can be equalized on both sides of your tympanic membrane, and it can now vibrate its little heart content. Right. So that's the eustachian tube. Eustachian tube. Now we get to the inner ear. Now the inner ear is a bony structure. It's bony. It's a bony structure, right? And it's filled with liquid. There's liquid in it. You don't need to know the liquid's name anymore. That was the old times. Now we just look at that. We have to know that there's liquid in it. So like I said, little snail, it's got the 3 semicircular canals, right? And they are perpendicular to each other, which means 90 degrees, right? And that's all to do with balance. We'll get there in detail a bit later. And at the bottom of each of these canals, there are little bubbles. And these bubbles are called ampulla, right. Just below the semicircular canals, the little snail's head, yeah, you'll find the utriculus, and just below that, you'll get a sac-like structure which is called the sacculus. The easy way to remember, they will never give it in so much detail in exam paper, is that the structure just below the semicircular canal is your utriculus, and then the one between the utriculus and the cochlea will be your sacculus, right? So this part will be your sacculus, right? Now the snail-like part here, this coily part here, this is your cochlea, right? And there's always 2 windows in the inner ear. We've got an oval window and a round window. Do you see that people were very troubled by circles when they named the inner ear? Because we've got semicircular, we've got oval, we've got round. Okay, so these are the windows of the inner ear. The top one is always oval. Top one is always oval, and the bottom is round. Round window. Okay. And then we get to the last part, which is the auditory nerve. Right, why? It's sound. This is not the optical nerve. This is not the sciatic nerve. This is sound. It's all about sound. It's from the ear, so it's the auditory nerve. But let's have a look in more detail. Right, let's start with the first part, the inner ear. Now the oval window receives vibrations from the stapes. Now that's that little bone here, the ossicle here, right? So there's little vibrations going in there. And the moment it vibrates, it causes pressure waves in this cochlea. It's no longer vibrations, it's now pressure waves. And that's the function of the oval window. Right, the 3 semicircular canals here on top, there and there and there, they are also filled with liquid. And like I said, the roundings at the bottom is called the ampulla, right? And they contain little receptors. And those receptors we call crista. Right. And they have a role to play in balance, right? And the next one is the Utriculus and the Sacculus. Like I said, they're in between the semicircular canal and the cochlea. And they contain little receptor cells that we call macula, right? And macula is also to do with balance. And then the last one here is the cochlea, and it contains little receptor cells that we call organ of Corti, right? Very important. They will be stimulated by movement of the liquid and converts the stimuli into impulses. The last one, round window. What that does is releases the pressure in the cochlea so that there's no distortion of sound and it prevents echoes. So that is basically the structure of the ear. But we need to go to an ad break now. I will see you just after the ad break.